Hey everybody, welcome.
Everyone.
Let me introduce my guest. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn on AI plus UX. This is hosted by STRAT. My name is Bryan, and my guest today is Jascha Goltermann, who's design manager at Booking.com. Jascha has worked on multiple strategic AI initiatives from a UX perspective. Hi, Jascha. Welcome to the stratosphere.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to grill you in a few minutes about your experiences at Booking.com with AI product design. But before I do, can you tell us a little bit about how you got here?
Sure. I can give you a little history about myself, a little summary of my journey. I have a background in communications design, so I'm one of those people who went into UX with a sort of graphic design background. I also have a personal history and interest in web development, so I have a bit of that front end dev side in me as well. I've also been interested in starting projects, and so I feel like I have a little bit of that business side mindset in me as well. In terms of my sort of professional experience, I've been a designer most of the time. I've worked in very different UX kind of roles. So in lead designer roles, very early on in my career, I also had opportunities to lead other designers and work in sort of head of UX or head of design roles. I've worked mostly in startups, mostly in e-commerce, some SaaS as well, all of that in Berlin. And then 3.5 years ago, I had this opportunity to join Booking.com to manage a team of designers who work in different teams. And so now I have this role of a design manager. And that basically means that I manage a team of designers, but they're not a design team per se that works as like a centralized team. All of these designers work in separate teams within their product teams, working with their PM and their developers. And so I kind of connect the work that they're doing on very different parts of our product. Booking.com has over 200 designers, so you can imagine that we also have a number of design managers, and those have sort of senior design managers. My peers that I kind of work with on a day-to-day basis are not just the designers in my team, but also the partners in with the product background, with the tech background. So the product leaders who manage product managers, or the tech leaders who manage engineering managers, who in turn manage the developers. So I really feel I am, yeah, I'm mostly trying to bring that UX perspective to those discussions that revolve around the direction that we're going in, the plans that we're making, the strategy that we're developing. The designers that I manage, that I lead, they work on different things, like I said. So I have some designers that work on our primary generative AI product, which is the AI trip planner, working on the evolution of that AI trip planner and creating that into a more sort of um, yeah, always sort of available assistant. And then I also manage the designers that work on the multi-vertical search experience, which means basically, well, when you go to booking.com, you can search for many things, from attractions and accommodations and flights and transport and all these things. So creating that into sort of a uh, holistic, universal, seamless experience is also part of the work that I'm trying to lead. There are AI touch points in many of those teams. Search is leveraging AI to make search a better experience, and of course, the AI trip planner is really built around AI. So for me, that gives me a little bit different lenses to look at designing with AI or building products with AI. On the AI trip planner side, it's really how can you build a product around the capability. On the search side, it's more how can you leverage the capability and build it into your products to solve user problems in a more effective way, for example, in a better way than without these AI capabilities. So these are different lenses. And yeah, I'm involved in AI initiatives as well beyond those teams. We have many sort of project teams or virtual teams. And so I feel like I have the privilege of sort of thinking about a little bit where this is all going.
Exactly, exactly. And that's why we're talking today. Let me give a small disclaimer, by the way, everybody. Jascha is speaking for himself today. He's not speaking on behalf of Booking.com. But with that in mind, tell us a little bit more about the trip planner. That's one that you and I have talked about quite a bit.
Yeah, so the AI trip planner is really, like I said, it's more like a product build around the AI capability, but at the same time, of course, it's also a product that is trying to solve user needs that have existed way before we've launched the AI trip planner. So what is it? It is a conversational experience. It is a sort of chat that you can pull up, and it helps you plan your trip, or it helps you, like find the right destination, find the right accommodation, find things to do, and you can express your travel preferences or your requirements in your own language, and then it will use LLM to understand the nuances of that language, and it will sort of generate a conversation. It's under the hood, it is connected to OpenAI's API, but it's also integrating in-house LLM capabilities, and there's a whole orchestration layer around it to make sure that it provides a certain experience that is uniquely booking. It also has access, of course, to those descriptions of properties and to UGC, user-generated content reviews and all that stuff. So it basically adds a layer on top of that, let's say, ChatGPT capability, in the sense that it's really a travel expert. The experience that we're trying to build there is, imagine you're talking to a travel agent or a travel assistant, or even just a local person from somewhere who's really knowledgeable about the place that you want to travel to, and who can just be a helpful person for you to plan your travel and decide where to go and what to do.
Yeah, I actually had an excellent experience with AI travel last summer. I was in Europe and I drove from Berlin to Barcelona, stopping in the major national parks along the way and doing photography. I was on a mission trying to connect the design of nature and the design of AI, but I could see how the trip planner would be amazing to have on that kind of a trip. I was just kind of winging it, but that sounds like a great tool.
It has certainly many interesting applications, like all those main use cases that have already existed for like finding where to go, finding what to do, comparing properties. Those are like the obvious ones, but essentially you could think of it, we're not there yet, but like getting in the direction of it as like an assistant that can really be by your side. Imagine you're already on a trip, like you said, you're walking through those parks and maybe you want to know what to do the next day. A lot of people don't want to already uh, already sort of define all the details of their trip before they go on a trip, but they would rather get to a destination and then figure out what to do when they're there. And so there are lots of opportunities um, for a generative AI product to really make that experience more helpful, more valuable to users, because you can express yourself, you can ask clarifying questions. It's more than just applying a filter or sorting results or going through all of these sort of conventional interface UI sort of tools, but really just sort of expressing your needs. And there's a lot of nuances in language. So as an example, if you're saying you want to go on a honeymoon vacation, right? Those are just two words. But if you're talking to a travel agent, then this person, from those two words, they will know that, oh, yeah, you're going to be two people, of course. This is going to be more than just a few days. Probably you have an elevated budget because this is a once in a lifetime vacation. You're maybe interested in more like romantic destinations, maybe some romantic activities. So there's a lot of information that is not easy to express just through filtering or these sort of conventional ways of expressing your intent and in conventional sort of interfaces that can match that intent. And so language carries a lot of meaning and information. And so, yeah, like I said, generative AI has capabilities that help us unlock a lot of value for users for these scenarios.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your journey as you progressed into that into that project, into that product, because I think a lot of people are at the stage where their companies are saying, put ChatGPT on whatever we make and it's going to be fine. And so a lot, it's a black box, right? Let me just strap that to our product and let's just go. But in this case, you mentioned that there's a combination of that plus internal models. And so once we get to internal models, I think a lot of people in the design, product design and research field, user experience field are concerned. How can I have an impact when I don't understand the statistics behind the model, or I don't understand the algorithms, or they don't want to talk to me because I'm a designer and they think I don't understand anything that they're doing. But in fact, those models do impact the experience, right?
Absolutely. That is a very real problem, I would say. There's a very real sort of situation that we're in, that these models, you have all those technical considerations that go into the details of how these models are built, what data they're trained on, but also how they're sort of tuned and fine-tuned. And these feel like technical considerations, but in the end, they do impact the experience. So, for example, with LLM temperature, you can do something like have a model that creates more creative output, or one that is a bit more stricter to the guidelines, to the prompts that sort of guide the LLMs. And the prompts themselves carry all that information for how the model should handle certain scenarios, certain situations, in which ways it should respond, and so on. And these might feel like technical adjustments, even sort of prompt writing now as a new term was often called prompt coding or prompt. It really is not that much of a technical only decision because it impacts the user experience. So what you as a designer need to do is not necessarily understand the technical details of how these models work, but you really need to be able to think about the experience that you want to have and be able to describe that, and then work, and that's the most important thing, work with those people who need to make those technical adjustments, and explain to them and work with them, collaborate with them, really communicate with them, be with them in a room to define what you think the experience should be like, and understand what the levers are that we can tune and adjust for models and on the technical side, because otherwise they will just make those decisions for you, not really even knowing into what effect they impact the experience. So I feel like there's a lot of experimentation also needed, adjusting prompts, adjusting sort of model definitions, adjusting a little bit those levers, and then seeing what output that generates, and then adjusting again, seeing what output that generates. The important part is making clear to those people who can adjust those things, or let's say machine learning engineers, that these things do really impact the end user experience. I feel that when you're working on these products that leverage generative AI technology in the background, then there's this easy pitfall, this easy sort of it's easy to assume that the role of the designer is to design the interface of that experience, to design the interactions and perhaps flows, like the entry points, and how to recover maybe a previous conversation. But those technical details that you mentioned, those considerations, really are what have even a bigger impact on that experience. If we take the AI trip planner as an example, the helpfulness of the AI trip planner is not so much defined by the layout of the experience, or whether the input field looks like this or like that, but it is the quality of the conversation, the dialogue quality. It is really how non-deterministic, for example, the dialogue is able to be, right? You want to have a conversation that flows naturally. You want to have an assistant that doesn't ask too many questions, but that asks the right level of questions. So all of these things are impacted through these sort of technical levers, technical decisions that I think UX designers need to be involved in.
I think that's where our main touch point is. I totally agree. I think that design kind of arose from art, and art was making objects, right? And so design was making objects as well. So you had industrial design, you had ergonomics, you had human factors, but still we're designing a thing. And I designed that website, I designed that thing to look like this. And with AI, we're not designing a thing, it's designing itself, right? It's going to do what it needs to do at the time based on the levers that went into it, based on the inputs, based on which variables are we optimizing for. So if you're not in those conversations, again, you're more decorating, you're decorating for the AI, but you're not actually impacting the AI experience. And that's what I hear you saying as well.
Yeah, decorating is a good word because the word design has often sort of been interpreted as defining what something looks like, but it is more defining what something is like. It doesn't necessarily just need to be on the visual level. It's not about the ornaments. So especially in multimodal experiences, or in experiences where you have conversation in the future, where you have multiple touch points, not just with maybe your laptop or your phone, but you're going to experience products with many different types of digital touch points, and they will carry over, whether it's while you're getting in your car or you're walking down the street. And so that experience is not going to be layouts and buttons, is going to be how helpful something is, what kind of service something provides to you.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering, as you started down that road, as you started learning about it, I think there's a lot of confusion about how to get started. So I'm wondering what you think are some of the most critical AI or machine learning concepts that designers and researchers should really get familiar with first, so that they can meaningfully contribute to the actual engine of the experience.
I think the most meaningful part of it, to become more sort of AI literate, is to understand prompt design. In most products that leverage generative AI capability, the best lever that you have to define the output quality is through prompts. So prompts are basically everything that you have that base model that is sort of trained on data that already has built-in guidance, let's say. But then those prompts add that layer of how do you want to leverage all that understanding of language, for example? How do you want to leverage all that training on data? So for us, when we're building the AI trip planner, obviously we want this to be helpful for travel. So we don't want it to end up in discussions about politics. So how do we create an AI trip planner that you don't engage with in a discussion about politics? Well, you
Yes.
prompt the model to guide the discussion back to travel related topics, right? So, and these considerations are, like we said, they go beyond the interface. So designers and writers and researchers, basically all those UX roles, they know how to define or how to better understand the kind of experience that we want to create for the end user. And they need to consider that part of that experience are all these situations now that you're placing the user and the person that is interacting with that product. So defining sort of scenarios becomes important, right? Designers are very much used to designing flows and designing interactions, and they're typically quite linear. So when you click here, you end up here, and this is how you go back, right? And they're also used to some level of personalization, but it's usually relatively rule-based personalization. But then with these types of tools, it becomes more fluent. There's not really a linear process in a conversation, for example, right? That conversation can go in so many different ways. You cannot just define, if the user talks about this, you do that. The user talks about that topic, you answer like this. Like, that would just be an infinite number of topics that's impossible to define. But you can, through prompting, you can give guidance of how to handle sort of more situations. Like we lack the terminology right now yet to talk about these things effectively, but I would say think of scenarios and situations rather than flows for these experiences. And yeah, prompting is the way to guide that.
And as you take steps toward having an impact on those things, what do the deliverables look like when you feed back? Is it a conversation that you're having with data scientists and engineers? Is it a kind of an information architecture taxonomy of replies, or what does it actually look like?
I think it can look very many different ways, but the tools that we're used to, they still serve for those purposes. You can absolutely use Figma to visualize how we would handle different scenarios, right? It's just important that those deliverables are not as strict as when we do normal handover to developers. You don't have like those exact specs where you say, this needs to be using this component. No, in a conversation, it's more like if we have conversations that are, for example, when you're building the HR planner, that are not about travel, we handle it in this way, and maybe you provide an example or two. So with that kind of deliverable, obviously, you're always also going to need to have a conversation as you cannot just sort of hand over that deliverable and hope that people with a technological background, developers or ML engineers or data folks, will just sort of take that and then build the experience. You're going to have to walk them through what you're trying to achieve. So ultimately, yes, maybe the tools that we use right now will not be the same tools for us to define that, but also those tools don't exist yet that are really fully sort of specifically built for that type of workflow. So the tools that we have so far work fine to get the job done, I'd say.
Yeah, and looking from the perspective of the technical folks, I think they have a reasonable argument that in some senses UX or design is very attached to websites, and yet I think there have been some spectacular technological failures over the years because the human lens was not in there. I'm thinking of Google Glass. I'm thinking of even the metaverse. People are not going to walk around with something strapped on their head all the time. And so there are some human factors that were ignored in some of these spectacular failures. But in order to have that credibility, you kind of have to speak some of the lingo, I think.
Yeah. Just how, I mean, we always have to advocate for the user experience, right? And what does that really mean? Well, through the insights from research, through data from experimentation, we try to get the best sense as possible of what are the main jobs that our users are trying to get done with our product. What are their main user needs? What are their main pain points? And so we bring that perspective to discussions in the team. We should bring those perspectives already when we're talking with product managers and developers and other roles when we're shaping sort of the direction that we want to evolve the product in. But then it becomes even more pressing when you're working with something with this new kind of technology. First of all, when you're working with technology, obviously it feels like the technologists, sort of the tech roles, the developers and the ML folks will feel like, oh, this is our domain. But well, you're building an experience with it. The technology is just a means to an end. It's also important to remind yourself, just like with the Google Glasses, well, do we really need to use this technology to solve this problem? Like, don't start with the tech, start with the user, right? Think about what problem are we trying to solve here? And then, of course, you can brainstorm and think about how can we leverage AI capabilities to solve these problems better. It's absolutely useful to have that kind of exercise and to do that kind of thinking, but don't force it as well. Not every problem needs an AI solution. So yeah, bringing back that perspective of the problems that you're trying to solve and not solutionize too soon, that is super helpful. And I feel like UX roles are naturally equipped to bring that perspective. That should be our job, has always been.
Agreed. And I think that I can trace that back to Leonardo da Vinci, who brought a human scale to innovation and technology and art, really long time ago. And so I'm a little concerned that the UX nomenclature is tied to website and mobile app design in such a way that it might be difficult for other roles to expect something different. And so at Strat, we've created a role that I'm calling AI Experience Architect, which is sort of an evolution of a UX role, but it says, I understand how this material works. I understand the pieces of it, and now I'm going to help architect an experience. And so we're going to have boot camps around how do you become one of those things. And so I'm wondering, you're a poster child of an AI experience architect. So I'm wondering, what were some of the challenging things that you had to learn about in your path?
Well, I think that's exactly the challenging learning that I had to make, is that it's not about the interface and the interactions and the flows and what something feels like and looks like alone. I think those things are still relevant for all digital experiences, but that's just the surface level, and sort of understanding that is really important. So we've had a craft that has understood this already for a long time, which is service design, because their focus is to look behind the curtain and see how things actually work together to create ultimately an experience at the surface level. But of course, they're focused on services, right? Now I think we need to leverage some of that thinking, though, that some of that the approaches that service designers have sort of perfected, and we need to apply some of that, and then we also need to apply some of the approaches that UX design has perfected, which is, how do we apply empathy to really understand what users need and want, and like take that. We also need to understand some of the strategic thinking that comes from product managers. Take that. We need to do some of that technical thinking and understanding how platforms work, how systems and services work together from tech roles. Those things go together into a new kind of role. You're calling it the AI experience architect. I think there's a lot of natural overlap with the roles of UX designers, but it is, I feel, necessary to define a new kind of role when we want to effectively define these experiences that leverage AI in an effective way, because it goes beyond, like we said, the interface. We've always had that struggle in the field of UX, by the way, that even the term designer kind of makes it seem like what we're concerned with is something visual, right? And UX designers have fought for years to teach the people that they work with, to teach the cross-functional product teams and other stakeholders, we're not just designing what it looks like, we're also designing what it feels like. We're not just designing the interface, we're also designing the flows. Like, there's not just UI, there's also the UX. Like, all of those, all of this is not a new sort of struggle, let's say, to our craft. But I think now it's a more dramatic transformation right now, because we've been fighting for the recognition that we're not just designing what something looks like, but also how it works. Now it's going beyond that. It's because when we've defined sort of how it works, what we still meant is like how the interaction works, how the interaction flows, what the interface, kind of how the interface works. Now it's going beyond the interface. Forget the interface, right? You can put together an interface with there's just tons of design systems out there that define what certain components ideally would look like, that can be used for which kind of scenarios. So, that's not really where our work is in the future of creating these experiences. The work is much more in creating the architecture. That's why I guess is clear why you're calling it an AI experience architect and not an AI experience designer. It really is about architecting that experience. There are so many things that are at play, and what are the foundations that need to go into it? What are the layers of systems that we need to define? So there's more strategic and technological thinking necessary for it, and a little bit more service thinking that is necessary for it. And so yeah, I think it will be more relevant for UX designers across the board to try to transform a little bit into that kind of thinking, right? Create a path for being able to work in that kind of role, especially now when AI is becoming much more accessible. AI technology, building models into your product is becoming much cheaper. It's going to be not just a matter of like big companies being able to do these things, but also
Right.
startups from around the world being able to build their own AI powered products. And so it's not going to take long until it affects really across the board the wide range of designers of our field, really.
I agree. I think there's a time window. I don't know how long the time window is because I have friends at all the platform companies and they're saying, well, 3 months from now, I mean, that's when your event is. Everything's going to be different. And so it's changing so fast. But Steve Jobs famously said, design isn't just how something looks, it's how it also works. And so with websites, around the year 2000, UX designers like myself, we had to learn about how the architectures back then worked in order to get that seat at the table for strategy and say, this is where that's going. But I think it's a little bit pretentious and somewhat of an entitled uh, posture to say that no, we did that before, so we still need to be the ones who are doing that. And I think
Mhm.
we're getting some pushback about that. Um, and so I guess I agree with what you're saying that it's inside that box, but then it's steep. It's a steep learning curve to get to
Mhm.
that point. Um, so let me switch gears a little bit, guys. Use chat to ask questions. I'm going to go to the chat in a few minutes and see what questions that you have that are there. I'm going to ask you to not ask Yasha about any secret Booking.com AI stuff, but rather, how do you get into it? What are some of the steps? What's your context? What are you looking at? What are some of the things you're thinking about? And ask Yasha to weigh in on that. Let me ask you this in the trip planner. I know when I was doing my little trip last year, I was saying something like, I want to go to a place. It was in Europe, and I said I want to go places where it's like Bilbo in the Shire from the Hobbit book series. I want to go somewhere it's like Bilbo in the Shire, good forests, some mountains nearby. I want to do some photography. I need to camp near an electrical outlet. And it, kind of was very personal to me, and it remembered that from trip to trip, from place to place. It brought me someplace I never heard of, Van Waas National Park, which was really like Bilbo in the Shire, if anybody knows that reference. But AI systems personalize interactions based on my behavior, plus all the information it had about all those locations was excellent. But what are some of the key experience design considerations when designing AI-driven personalization without crossing over into, well, the business does have goals. We want people to book stuff, um, booking. Yeah. And, where does it sort of cross over into, I don't know, invasion or manipulation, or how do you deal with it's a powerful thing, it's a powerful tool. What are some of the considerations as you're designing that maybe there's some pushback from the business on? And don't give
Yeah.
away secrets, of course, but
Yeah. First of all, that personalization that you've experienced there, I think is really interesting because it is the type of personalization that AI enables, which is personalization at the individual user level, versus the personalization that has been around for a long time, which is sort of through segmentation. This type of user, oh, a return user gets this. Oh, you've bought this in the past, and then you're seeing these recommendations. But
right.
what sort of AI systems are good at are like we're analyzing what you're doing right now, and especially if you're expressing your intent, especially if it's a natural language, because like I said, that carries a lot of additional sort of nuances that you can work with, and then personalizing recommendations for you at the individual level. Okay, now those considerations that you mentioned about, well, how can we still make it something that works for the business? I think it goes back to the same strategy that I feel UX designers always had to employ, which is making it clear that, first of all, when you create an experience that solves user needs, there is business value in that, right? If you create something that is truly helpful to users, they will stick around. And so there's more opportunities for them to engage in your product. On the other hand, if you just do personalization or if you just leverage AI technology for the sake of um, improving purely business focused metrics, then that can also lead to a deterioration of user trust. It can be too aggressive. Like you want to steer away from those things also for the sake of the business. So I guess being able to explain how user needs are really tied to positive business outcomes will help steer it in the healthy direction. Of course, we were not building the AI trip planner just for the sake of building the AI trip planner. But we do believe that if we create a truly useful travel assistant, and you remember, hey, booking is that place that can also help me figure out what to do. I have it all in one place. It's super helpful. It has all that data and knowledge and millions of user reviews about places and whether the restaurant at this hotel is good or not. Like you can make that truly valuable for users in a way that the business will benefit from.
Yeah, I liked something you said earlier too, that it aligns with the brand. The brand is throughout that concept, and I think that Booking has a brand where that kind of partnership with its customers is very evident. Um, by the way, if somebody wants to get to the trip planner, what's the best way for them to find it?
So right now it is live in the US, UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. I might be wrong, but these are from the top of my head. Soon it will be available also in European countries. So it's either waiting or if you're, in one of those English speaking countries, then you can just open the Booking app and you will see it right on the home screen.
Nice. Let me ask you this. If it seems like what you're saying too is that the behavior of the AI product is based on the data that it has. And I guess it's taking a lot of data, which is why it's getting rolled out gradually to these different places. But what role should designers and design researchers play in data selection and curation, data quality? Bias is kind of a buzzword, and I think it often means to people like bias against certain kinds of people, and not necessarily just that the data is skewed. But without being a data scientist, how can, what aspects are designers and design researchers looking at as they evaluate, are we using the right data?
Yeah. So I think again, it's a little bit through sort of you define the experience, then you're going to have to think about what kind of data will we need to achieve that experience, and then you try out things and see what works. And bias can mean many different ways, right? It's not just sort of um, cultural bias, but you can also have bias by just sort of inputting a certain type of data. If we look at the HR planner in the context of Booking.com, if we only connected this to, let's say, the official descriptions of properties or attractions, right, then it would have a sort of very corporate view of the things that you can do and the hotels that might be right for you. But then if you connect user generated content as an additional source of data, you have a much more nuanced view of whether this place is truly for you. If you're looking for a hotel with a beachfront at a sandy beach, like that information is probably coming from reviews saying this has an amazing sandy beach or even not, right? So what kind of data you connected with is an important decision, right? And then yeah, I guess it's not that we need to become experts in how data is used to train models, but sort of we need to understand that at an experience level, if we want to have, let's say, with this example, uh, truly genuinely helpful recommendations, let's say, of where to go or what to book, there's more data that we need to connect to it than just publicly available data or the descriptions that are provided by the partners, or other proprietary data. Like we need to look at what is the possible data that we could access, and how would it add value? How would it lead us to get to that experience, and then trying that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are going to be multiple perspectives on that question, right? I think the business is going to have a perspective, the business owner, whatever tool it is. I think the tech team probably wants to be straightforward and kind of easy to clean. And I think the experienced designers want it to be fun and interesting and compelling. Let me look at the chat and see if there's a question there. Okay, Patrick says, how does the trip planner interact or complement the smart filters on booking.com? What's the next step for the smart filters, or will that phase out as the trip planner becomes more available?
That is a super good, interesting question. That what I can share is that this is not fully figured out. So just for context for everyone else, Smart Filters is another um, product that Booking.com has launched that is built around generative AI technology. And what you can do is that when you're searching for properties, you can describe your property, or you can describe things that, like, requirements that you have, and then it will apply filters for you. And so the benefit here is that you don't have to look through the long list of filters. You can just sort of describe it, and it will do that for you. Now, right now, our AI trip planner is a relatively separate experience. You can access it right through the app, but it's not yet where we want it to be, in that it sort of complements your experience as you search for something, or that it complements your experience as you compare properties, or look at properties, or things to do, or these things, right? So at the moment, it's fine to have one AI feature here where you describe what you're looking for, and it helps you sort of apply filters and update sort of the results, and have another AI sort of conversational experience where you can maybe look for inspiration of where to go and all these things. But obviously, we're also thinking of a future in where that assistant is always by your side. And then the question becomes, do you still need to have another mode of input to describe something if this is already basically the main mode? I cannot say that we have a definitive answer to that.
Well, I imagine that the trip planner is learning also, and it's going to learn from a bunch of interactions and it's going to figure things out. But I think the nomenclature tells us something as well. A filter says, this is a database. What are the parameters that you want to analyze for your trip? And the trip planner sounds like this is somebody that already did the trip and is with you and is going to guide you and remember kind of your who you are and what you like. And it certainly had a big impact for me as I was taking my trip. Let me ask another question from here. I think this is from Pratya. I think one of the main challenges we faced in the past is communicating with engineers in their language when it comes to AI. This was easier to do when it was about websites and applications, but it took a good amount of research and understanding to objectively define what kind of experience I want to build and why that's useful. This is a great question. How can we build this muscle? I love that.
Yeah, well, it's a difficult question to answer, though, because there is no one clear approach to this, but it definitely resonates, this challenge. Um, Look, the thing is that now that we're working with a new technology, like I said before, it feels like this is the domain knowledge of technical roles, but in reality, also it is not. It should be clear to everyone that this is also new technology where nobody has yet exactly sort of nobody has that ownership of the technology. Nobody has figured out yet exactly, right? So it's also a good opportunity
Yeah.
for us to push for playing a central role in how to build it into products. UX designers always need to try to be able to speak a technical language when interfacing with technical roles, and being able to speak a business language when interfacing with sort of, business roles with product managers and with product leaders. It's the same thing here. So having an understanding of the terminology, having some AI literacy, I think helps, simply because you as a designer have probably the same kind of reaction if a developer talks to you and shows a really genuine understanding of user needs. you feel that you can work with that person on a different level than if they basically ask you for, these sort of robotic requirements that need to be translated to be machine readable, right? So
Right.
for us, being able to speak as much as we can, tech language means investing a little bit in AI literacy. So not just playing around, I guess, with AI tools ourselves, but also reading up a little bit on how they work. It feels like there's so many million different ways of how these work, but it's really not that diverse at this moment. We have a variety of different tools that under the hood leverage relatively similar concepts, at least. So yeah, I mean, just the number of times that we've talked about models in this conversation alone, right, speaks something about how the concepts right now when we're talking about generative AI are not as vast as they might seem.
Agreed. Agreed. And that's a great point. What we're developing right now is a boot camp for people that want to learn about AI who come from a design or a research background. And in the boot camp, we're of course aiming for that role. But it's also just to get people familiar with how things work and enough to have a conversation and indeed push back on some things. Sogra says, it's good to see you again, Sogra. Welcome back. In my current role, design researcher turned software platform product manager, I have found that sharing and involving the dev, architect, PO, QA, a bunch of people, leads during the strategy, during the user needs, during the insights and North Star vision helps build higher confidence roadmaps and avoid trade-off pitfalls that are often discovered when it's too late. So I guess not a question, but an observation.
Yeah, I mean, that speaks to collaboration, early involvement. Has always been important. I think is just perhaps more pressing now. There's one thing that just crossed my mind, because you mentioned that this new role that you're sort of shaping and you're building this boot camp around. You're inviting, for example, UX designers, but also researchers to sort of extend a little bit their skill set, their perspectives. Really, it's about the lens through which they look at architecting experiences, right? Writers play a big role in that too. I feel that when we talk about AI, most of the time we talk about generative AI, and generative AI is a lot about understanding the nuances of language. So there's also a big overlap with the understanding of tone and voice and how language shapes experiences. And that is an expertise that UX writers bring to the table, or content writers, content designers. I just wanted to share that as well.
No, good point. Exactly. Let me get to another question. Let's see. Oh, there are quite a few. Let's see. Um, these are kind of long. Let's see. Some people are giving others advice.
Here's a question that I find interesting, if I may, because I'm also looking at the chat. Pratya, I think we already had a question from her, right? But this one is about that generative AI capabilities right now. It seems that they're predominantly leading to these sort of chat-based interfaces. And the question is here, how is this evolving? How's this interface evolving? What does the future look like, and how can we be a part of it? I find that super interesting, because I've also observed the same thing. And obviously with the AI Chip Planner, that is a prime example, because it is a conversational experience. It is a chat interface. To me, there is the chat interface itself, I think, will remain to be helpful, but whether you need to actually type yourself is the question. Maybe you're interfacing with a conversational experience through voice, or what other ways we might even unlock to express your intent. Maybe you're just sort of sharing your Instagram feed or other things, and I think there is still going to be a case for logging the way how you've expressed intent in a way that might feel conversational, but it doesn't have to resolve around this sort of prompt and answer and input sort of question and answer kind of chat experience. And then what we touched on earlier is this sort of personalization at the individual user level. I think this is a direction where more and more products will leverage AI that are non-conversational. So basically, don't think of chat interfaces as being the main ways to innovate with AI capabilities. You can build AI capabilities into, first of all the existing features and capabilities that you already have in your product and in your interface. And even the interface itself will eventually be something that you can personalize with AI to a large extent. So if you, in the sort of travel aspect, if you consider right now you have this sort of e-commerce paradigm where you have like a search bar and you have like filters and you have like results, but eventually you will just sort of express your intent and the interface will sort of create different layouts based on what you need in that moment. So if you're interested in comparing properties, you will see a comparison view. If you're interested in locations, you will see a map view. If you're so really thinking more in terms of like digital experiences being a canvas that can be shaped at the individual user level based on what they need to do, what they need to achieve in that moment, rather than these separate pages where in order to open the map, you go here. And if you want to go to results, you go to this page and then you have filters on that page. Instead, you will just sort of prompt a website and tell it what you need to get done. And it will use that canvas to help you get to that point the fastest possible way. So that's also, I feel like, maybe more forward-looking, a bit more futuristic, but it's super interesting direction to look into, which is sort of dynamic UI, dynamic screen composition, personalized interfaces.
I think we always wanted to do things that way. It just, the materials weren't there and the technology wasn't there. And it's very exciting to me that now they are there. I mean, I think some design roles, I mean, Salesforce presented back in 2017 at a STRAT conference where they showed an interface designing itself and how after millions of inputs, it just came to the right conclusion and tested it 10,000 times, like in the next 20 minutes. So if we're about interface design, I think the days are limited where that's going to be relevant. But if we're talking about how to make this sort of learning thing learn better and learn how to serve human needs better, I think that's a very worthwhile role to have. Andre asked a question I was also wondering about. Creating a usability test plan for UX interfaces is one thing, but what does usability testing of an AI tool look like? How is it different? What are you looking for when you're testing the trip planner?
Yeah, that is a very good question. The unsatisfying answer to this is you can't really perfectly test it yet. It's much easier with screens and linear flows. You will just create a prototype and that's it. But how do you prototype an experience where somebody can express something and then what they see is personalized, is individual based on that? That's not really something you can easily prototype. So there are different ways to approach it. Either the one that is, I think, the least helpful one is you prototype an example experience and you're just trying to get users to mentally, think that they're interacting with this, with this product, with this capability, with this tool that is sort of individual to them, but you'll never really be able to mimic that experience. So the learnings that you get from that are very limited. Another approach, which is quite costly, but at the moment necessary, is you actually sort of build the product and test it. You build at least the raw version of it. You build something either that is ready for internal testing or limited testing. Like for now, we've always had sort of the luxury of being able to test an experience before we invest in actually building it by creating a prototype. So that's that the goal of that is ultimately to save you money, that you don't build the wrong things, because building something is always more costly than sort of designing a prototype. But now here you sometimes have to invest in building sort of the raw core of the experience so that you can test it, see what input actually is generated when somebody, for example, with the HR planner, when somebody interacts with it. And yeah, we're trying to build, at least at Booking.com, internal tools that can do a little bit of that for us. So in the case of the HR planner, if we want to make adjustments to the model and want to test what they look like before we roll them out, obviously we can do that with our internal tools. But if we had to build an entirely new tool now around generative AI, like for example, when we built the smart filters, we had to at least build a functioning beta version for it in order to be able to test and optimize it before we can then actually release it.
Excellent. Well, we only have a couple of minutes left. My dream for these Friday Lunch and Learns is that the conversation would continue in the AI plus UX group on LinkedIn. It's got over 100,000 members of it. It's just not very active, and frankly, it's not very interesting at this point because there's not a lot of conversation. So I would love, there's a few more questions that are here that we're not going to have time for today, but I would love if you guys would ask those questions to Jascha in the group, the AI plus UX LinkedIn group. And if Jascha has time next week, possibly look through there. We're going to post the video of this session in that group. I think depending on Valeriu, when he's able to do that, but probably going to be Monday or Tuesday, we're going to publish this video. And then there are some remaining questions. I hope you guys will @name Jascha and ask him to comment about those things that are on your mind. Jascha, thanks for taking time out for this. I have one last question for you, and you have about 1 minute left to answer it. But suppose they make you king of AI products at Booking.com, and designers from this conversation and from all over LinkedIn say, Jascha, what kind of person are you looking for on your team who's going to be designing these experiences?
Mm-hmm. I think more than anything, I would look for somebody who's really curious. So you don't need somebody who already says, I have the experience of building this or that, but somebody who is showing, the motivation and drive to grow and understand how these things work. So curiosity is the most important skill still.
And that's what Leonardo da Vinci had in spades. So Jascha, thanks so much for taking time out today. Everybody, thanks for joining our call today. We'll have one of these every Friday, and we'll post the video of this session on Monday or Tuesday. Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Valeriu, for helping pull this together.
Thanks, everyone, for joining.